Vikings, let's win this game.
Vikings fans, take a look at what is happening behind the scenes. There is serious talk about a third signing arriving to compete for space on the offense, and there is even real discussion about trading a young talent on the team. And it does not stop there. There is also an analyst questioning whether the most recent big gamble will actually work inside the system. And at the end of this sequence, a story shows up that does not involve a trade or a signing, but is already affecting whether an offensive star stays with the team. And that should get your attention right away. Let's get started. Now look at the situation developing inside the Vikings offense. It could completely change the tone of the battle for the most important position on the team. The coaching staff plans to enter training camp with two names competing directly for the starting job, Kyler Murray and J.J. McCarthy, one veteran who just arrived and one young player still trying to establish himself in the league. But even with that competition already set, people inside the organization believe a third quarterback could still arrive to join the battle. Yes, the room could get even more crowded, and this is where it starts to get really interesting. According to behind-the-scenes information, there is real interest in bringing back Carson Wentz, a veteran who recently spent time in Minnesota and already knows the offensive system under Kevin O'Connell. That familiarity would make the adjustment easier and could give the coaching staff more security in case the competition between Murray and McCarthy does not resolve quickly. And that matters, because once camp gets messy at quarterback, the whole team feels it. To be honest with you, when I first heard about this possibility, I thought, man, would this make the environment even more complicated? Because quarterback is not just any position, it is the position. When you put three players fighting for the same spot, the atmosphere gets heavy. Every practice becomes a test. Every mistake becomes a discussion. And there is another interesting detail in all of this. If Wentz actually arrives, the battle stops being a normal training camp competition. It almost becomes an offensive laboratory, and that changes everything. Kevin O'Connell could end up testing very different quarterback styles inside the same system. One more mobile option like Murray, another still developing like McCarthy, and possibly a veteran presence like Wentz. That shows something very clear about the moment this team is in. Minnesota is still trying to figure out what identity it wants on offense for next season, and when a team is still at that stage of construction, anything can happen, including unexpected moves. That is when depth charts shift fast. So what does that really tell you? Because while the fans debate who should be the starter, some analysts are looking at the other side of the story. There are people around the league who believe McCarthy could end up in trade discussions if the competition gets out of control. And that changes the entire scenario. Suddenly, that development project could become a trade asset. We have seen this happen in the NFL before. A young quarterback loses space. Suddenly, another team appears interested in betting on that potential. And when that starts, the timeline can move a lot faster than fans expect. Actually, let me tell you something a lot of people ignore. There are teams in the league quietly monitoring McCarthy's situation. Quietly. And that is exactly why this story is not just about who will be the starter. It is also about what could happen to the future of that young quarterback if the coaching staff decides to go in a different direction. That is a franchise-level decision. Now here is the real question. If another quarterback joined this competition, would you want to see more competition, or do you think it would only create chaos inside the roster? And stay with me, because the next story starts moving into the territory of a possible trade involving an important name in this battle. A quick request, subscribe to the channel and jump into the comments. Here, the voice of the fans really matters, and trust me, you are going to want to be part of this one. Now the story gets even more interesting, because the discussion is not just about who will win the battle on offense. There is also a possible trade starting to appear on the horizon. And look, when you combine a young quarterback, high expectations, and a team trying to adjust its direction, these conversations appear quickly. The situation revolves around J.J. McCarthy, a quarterback who entered the league with huge expectations, a high draft pick, a lot of talent, but also a complicated stretch of injuries and inconsistency during his first years. The result? His future in Minnesota is becoming a topic of conversation, and that is where the pressure starts building. With the arrival of Kyler Murray to compete for the starting role, some analysts have already raised a possibility that few fans were considering until recently. The Vikings could explore a trade involving McCarthy. Nothing is confirmed. There is no official negotiation happening right now, but the idea has started circulating among journalists and people around the league. And once that starts circulating, front offices pay attention. And this is where the situation takes another turn. There is a team that could make a lot of sense in this equation: the Arizona Cardinals. After moving on from Murray, Arizona suddenly has a long-term question at quarterback. That is where the irony becomes impossible to ignore. While Minnesota looks forward with Murray, Arizona could end up looking at McCarthy as a possible future investment. The Cardinals could even rely on veteran Jacoby Brissett for the short term while developing a younger option. That is why this idea is not as random as it sounds. To be honest with you, this type of move happens in the NFL more often than people realize. Different teams see players in completely different ways. A player who does not fit in one system can flourish in another. We have seen that happen with many quarterbacks over the years. And when you look at the current landscape of the league, several franchises are desperate for someone to develop. So it would not be surprising at all if once Minnesota opens that door, interested teams appear quickly. And if that happens, everything speeds up. Trade value shifts, leverage shifts, the whole conversation changes. Now, looking at this from the perspective of the fans wearing purple and gold, the conversation is different. Is it worth giving up on a young quarterback so early? Because even with the early struggles, there is still talent there. There is still potential. And quarterback is a position that sometimes takes several years before it truly explodes. On the other hand, the NFL does not have much patience. If the coaching staff believes it has found a better solution now, the team may prefer to move forward. It may also try to recover some value in return. And that brings up another important point. A trade like that probably would not bring an enormous return. The league knows about the challenges McCarthy has faced at the beginning of his career, so the market value would likely be more moderate. Even so, it could help the team strengthen other areas of the roster, and that part matters too, because one move at quarterback can reshape the rest of the team. And look, that decision could directly influence the direction of the offense for the next few years, because if the trade happens, Minnesota basically closes the door on that original development plan. It would be a clear change in direction, a big one. But hold on. Because while that possible trade is still just an idea, people outside the organization are already building a different narrative. Some national analysts are saying the new signing on offense may not work the way many people expect, and that opinion is getting attention for a reason. Now let's talk about something that honestly always appears when the Vikings make a major move: strong opinions from national analysts. And this time was no different. Right after the signing of Kyler Murray, some commentators began questioning whether this gamble would actually work inside Minnesota's offensive system. One of them was very direct. Jason McIntyre said he is not convinced this change will transform the offense the way many people expect. According to him, talent has never been the real issue for Murray. The problem would be consistency, preparation. That heavy routine separates good players from true offensive leaders in the NFL, and that is a serious charge. Because if that part is true, this is bigger than scheme. He basically raised this question: will Murray truly embrace the daily work needed to command a team? Extra practice, film study, constant adjustments to the system. That is the difference between flashes and real control of an offense. To be honest with you, when I hear comments like that coming from the outside, I always feel divided. On one side, analysts love creating controversy. It is part of the show. The more discussion there is, the bigger the audience. But on the other hand, the criticism did not appear from nowhere. Murray has always shown flashes of incredible talent, amazing plays, explosive runs, difficult passes that very few players can make. At the same time, however, his career has also been marked by ups and downs, moments when he looked like a superstar in the league. In other moments, the offense simply stalled. So what version are the Vikings really getting? That is the whole story here. Now, looking at the current situation with the Vikings, there is one factor that could completely change this story: the offensive system led by Kevin O'Connell. Minnesota's coaching staff has already shown in recent years that it can rebuild quarterbacks. The staff can adjust mechanics. It can simplify reads. It can also create an environment that allows the player to perform more freely. We have seen that happen before. And if it happens again, the entire outlook changes. So there is a strong argument on the other side of the debate. Maybe this is exactly the place where Murray needed to land. A strong offensive coach, elite weapons on offense, a structure that has already proven it can develop players. In fact, some analysts believe the internal competition for the position may not last very long. Bryant McFadden is one of the voices suggesting that Murray could eventually win the battle over McCarthy once practices really begin. And that would completely change the direction of the offense. Really change it. It would change expectations overnight. Now let me throw this question to you. If this signing really works, could the Vikings offense return to being one of the most dangerous units in the league? Or do doubts still remain about this gamble? Because while the conversation about the offense dominates the headlines, Another situation is happening behind the scenes. It could strongly affect the defense. It involves a possible trade of an important player. It may even involve a division rival, and that is where things really heat up. Now hold on to this story because it touches a very sensitive point for any Vikings fan. Negotiations with a division rival. Yes, there is a real possibility being discussed behind the scenes involving the trade of an important defensive player. Jonathan Greenard is the name now circulating in those conversations, and one of the teams interested is exactly one of those teams we love facing, but hate seeing get stronger. Detroit. The Lions are looking to strengthen their pass rush. They already have Aiden Hutchinson on one side of the defensive line, but they are still searching for someone on the other side to complete the pressure against opposing quarterbacks. That is where Greenard entered the conversation. Minnesota is listening to trade offers. That does not mean Greenard will leave tomorrow. There is no agreement in place, but the door for negotiations has been opened. And when that happens in the NFL, things can accelerate quickly, really quickly. That is why this cannot be brushed off. The central issue in this story is the contract. Greenard still has years left on his current deal. However, he is reportedly seeking a restructure or a new contract with more money that reflects his production on the field. And apparently the Vikings are not completely comfortable committing to that financial decision right now. And that is where the stakes show up. Because once money and production collide, tough roster calls follow. To be honest with you, this type of decision always divides the fan base, because we are talking about a player who, when healthy, pressures the quarterback all game long. He has already shown real production in the league. Sacks, pressures, tackles in the backfield. He is not just a promise. He has already proven he can create disruption. That is what makes this so tricky. But at the same time, the NFL is a salary puzzle. Every major contract affects other parts of the roster. Minnesota seems to be evaluating exactly that. If a trade appears that brings a valuable draft selection or strategic value, the team could consider going in another direction. And if they do, that decision will not just affect one spot. It will affect the whole defensive picture. Now comes the part that makes everything even more tense. The Lions are not the only interested team. The Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Cowboys have also been linked as possible suitors. In other words, there is a market, a real one. And a real market changes the pressure on Minnesota. But the idea of sending Greenard to Detroit raises a question every fan wearing purple and gold feels immediately. Is it worth strengthening a direct rival? Because if that defender ends up lining up on the other side against Minnesota 2 times every season, the story could become very uncomfortable. And not just uncomfortable, it could come back to haunt the team fast. And look, when trade rumors start circulating like this, it usually means something is moving behind the scenes. It could take days, it could take weeks, but it rarely appears out of nowhere. So what happens if this thing suddenly picks up speed? Now, even with this heavy story involving a possible trade inside the division, the next piece of news hits another area fans feel strongly about. It is not a signing, it is not a trade. It is something that puts the future of one of the most productive offensive talents into question. And this situation, honestly, is starting to worry a lot of people. Now we arrive at a situation that does not involve an immediate trade or a new signing, but could still strongly affect the future of the Vikings offense. The reason for that is not happening on the field. It is happening off it. One of the most productive young talents in the Vikings offense has once again entered discussion inside the organization. That player is Jordan Addison. The reason is off-field issues that continue appearing throughout his career in the league. None of that changes the fact that when Addison is on the field, the impact is real. Important receptions, big plays, touchdowns, and decisive moments. He quickly became a very relevant piece of the offense after arriving with the team. Production has been consistent. His chemistry with the offensive system has been strong. His numbers clearly show his talent. But the NFL does not look only at what happens between the lines. The Vikings do not either. And that is where this gets uncomfortable. Because talent is one thing, trust is another. Over the last few years, Addison has been involved in several off-field situations that drew attention. Legal issues, incidents that generated headlines, situations that both the league and the franchise had to manage. Nothing that permanently removed him from the team, but enough to raise an important internal question: trust. To be honest with you, this kind of situation weighs heavily when the time comes to talk about big money, and that is exactly where this story enters. Addison has reached a moment in his contract when the franchise needs to start thinking about the future. An extension, a new deal, financial guarantees. These elements turn a young talent into a long-term investment, and that is exactly why this matters right now. But for now, the Vikings are not ready to take that step. According to people close to the organization, The possibility of a long-term extension is still open. Nothing has been decided. Several factors are being analyzed, and here is the real pressure point. One of them is simple. The team already has another major offensive star receiving a massive contract in Justin Jefferson. Keeping two players at the same position with extremely high deals could complicate the salary balance of the roster. But that is not the only issue. Off-field maturity is also being watched closely. The franchise wants to see growth. It wants to see stability. It wants to be certain the investment is worth the risk before placing a mountain of money on the table. That is not a small call. That is a major bet on the future. Meanwhile, there is an alternative in the current contract that could provide more time for the decision. The team can activate the additional option available for high draft selections. That would keep Addison under contract for one more year. It would not require an immediate extension. It is basically a way of saying, we will keep evaluating. And that puts next season under a very interesting spotlight, because Addison will step onto the field knowing every game is also a test. Production still matters, but behavior, leadership, and maturity also enter the equation. That means the pressure will be there every week. When a talented athlete plays with something to prove, sometimes the result is explosive. Sometimes it changes everything. Now, looking at everything we discussed today, it becomes clear the Vikings are going through a moment of major decisions. Competition on offense, possible trades on the roster, strategic signings, doubts about the future of certain important pieces. That is exactly why the conversation now needs to happen calmly, because what is happening in Minnesota could define the direction of this team for the next several years, and that is the part nobody can ignore. Let me tell you something. When you put together everything that has been happening behind the scenes with the Vikings, it becomes clear the team is at one of those crossroads moments. There is a new signing trying to take command of the offense. There is a real internal battle that could change the future of a young quarterback. There is the possibility of a trade involving an important defensive piece. There is also an off-field situation making the franchise think twice before committing heavily to a talented offensive player. None of this is small. These are decisions that can shape the direction of the team for years. Anyone who lives and breathes Vikings football understands exactly how this works. Sometimes one correct decision changes everything. Sometimes one mistake costs entire seasons, and that is why this stretch matters so much, because the next few moves could define the tone of the entire season. But one thing I know for sure, the fans wearing purple and gold never step away from the discussion. So tell me in the comments, which of these situations worries you the most right now with the Vikings? The battle on offense, the possible trade on defense, or the story surrounding the future of one of the team's playmakers? Stay tuned. SKOL Vikings. Let's go.